Welcome to the second video. Now you may have noticed that in the first video, I said that that video would be explaining to you how to use your introduction methodology. This video instead will be looking at methodology. The previous video was teaching you about how to write your introduction. Now, methodology, what does this word mean? What do you think it means? It's about how you collected your data, the methods you use, the fieldwork methods you use to collect your data. It isn't about explaining your data. It isn't about describing your data. It's a step-to-step guide to the reader about how you collected your data. Okay? So it's the how which we're thinking about here, not the why, the how. And the methods. Notice how I say methods, not method, because you should be looking at two different methods. Now this could be, for example, a traffic count and an environmental quality survey. And each of these methods should have a graph or bar chart processing the data. These are two examples. Okay, so let's look at an example of a methodology here. So methodology, you want to have a couple of separate paragraphs. One paragraph for your first method, another paragraph for your second method. That will give good structure to your report. You also want to have a subtitle, method and data collection or methodology, so it's easier for me to mark, it's easier for the reader to read, it's easier for you to write. Now, let's look at this methodology, try and think about why it's good and what can be improved about it. My first method of collecting information is a questionnaire. So she did a questionnaire. Okay, this is a good way to start your methodology because it states to the reader exactly what your method was. The second sentence or the second few sentences should be about how you collected the data, what you did. So in this case, I asked members of the public several questions about how they use the area, how frequently they use the area, which facilities they use in the area, and how they feel about changes/improvements to the area. Now that's a lot of detail, and that's good because questionnaires are qualitative ways of finding out information, relying much on public opinion of an area, and a questionnaire could be an example of a bit of processed data. You probably didn't do one in this case, but you can if you want. And you want to state to the reader in this paragraph exactly the kind of questions you asked and what kind of information you wanted to try and find. Write it as if the person reading it knows nothing about your questionnaire, nothing about what a methodology is. You're stating step by step what you are doing. Let's carry on. This method of collecting information was effective as it helped me understand that the majority of people are extremely positive about Fountain Bridge, and it gave me a better idea of how people use the area. Okay, one of the other things you want to write about in your methodology is why it was effective. Okay, you chose it for a reason, didn't you? So why did you choose it? Just like in your introduction, you're stating why. Why did you choose that particular method of gathering data and not another? Is it more related to the question? Each of these methods have different advantages and disadvantages. This is when we begin to evaluate each of our methodologies. So a questionnaire can give you a wide variety of information about how people feel about an area. A disadvantage of a questionnaire is that you're relying on subjective bias. People's opinions can change depending on circumstances. For example, if you're interviewing people about how they feel about the city centre in rush hour in the morning when they want to get to work, they might not feel good about it. Now, before I comment on that a bit more, let's look at the second method. The second method I have used to collect data, remember your second paragraph, second method, is by doing an environmental quality survey. Now, this is very important that you mention the specific locations you did the survey on. If you're doing a traffic count, you want to mention the specific street names you were surveying the traffic count. In this environmental quality survey, the specific areas you were reviewing the environment. So she has mentioned Dundee Street. I completed the survey halfway along Dundee Street. This is really good information here because she's very exact about where she went in Fountain Bridge, using 10 factors. Now, this is also very important because environmental quality surveys have different indicators you're measuring your environmental quality against. attractiveness, noisiness, cleanliness, amount of cars, and safety of the area. Now, in your case, it could be different. You could be measuring, in your case, you could be measuring, for example, vandalism, graffiti, open green space. But you can choose your indicators, or you can rely on the template one I have put on Teams. Then what you were doing in the environmental quality survey is you were rating each of the areas out of 5. It's what we call a bipolar survey. So the closer to 5 being excellent, the closer to 1 being bad. And it's a kind of continuum. Then you add up the score for each category and you get a final number. And you add that number up and you give it a score. And Fountain Bridge scored high, helps you understand that the environmental quality survey is good of the area. The environmental quality is good in the area. But there are also areas that could be improved because nowhere is going to be perfect. Trust me on that. You're not going to give a perfect score to any area. Okay? So for your environmental quality survey, you want to be mentioning the different variables you looked at, the different indicators, the street name, what you rated it out of 5 and your total scores, and just how you basically did it step-by-step guide. Okay, let's look at another example. Okay, so here's someone from last year. Using a tally chart, I carried out a traffic and pedestrian count. So they've joined 2 and 1, but I prefer if you could just do a traffic count and a pedestrian count separately on 3 different roads in Fountain Bridge. Now, notice how this person has not decided to write, or not, maybe forgotten to write the different road names. I prefer if you could write what road 1 is, what road 2 is, and what road 3 is. So you're giving the reader information about each of the 3 separate locations. Okay? You need to make sure you're adding every single bit of detail in your method, in how you gathered your data. Remember that you're doing intervals in 5-minute periods in each location, and what you want to include that information too, because it's part of your methodology. And also notice how this individual is stating why 3 different types of roads were a good way to do it, because they give you a variety of data and gives you the best busyness of Fountain Bridge, the most realistic, authentic interpretation of how busy Fountain Bridge is. So you want to get 3 different roads from 3 different areas, preferably quite far away from each other, so you're getting a wide area of research done. Okay, and mention that you didn't pick 3 roads in close proximity to each other. You picked 3 roads or 3 particular locations quite far apart from each other, so you're getting a real good overview of how the location is. Now, I mentioned earlier that part of your methodology, you should be writing a reason why it helped you find information. Okay, so you're trying to, for example, in this case, the traffic count, it gives you an idea about how traffic is in the area. But also what I'd like you to do is try and think about whether it was primary or secondary data. So what were the advantages of your particular method? Now, this is, why was it effective? So for example, if you're looking at a traffic count, this is a primary bit of data because you're collecting it firsthand. You in the street, looking at the number of vehicles and type of vehicles going past, it's primary data. If on the other hand, you were looking at a newspaper article, okay, a newspaper article of traffic congestion, let's try and find one. It's probably going to be about the COVID-19 epidemic and how traffic congestion. Okay, this one's on Wales Online. This is secondary information because somebody has already written it. Somebody has already got the information, okay? So it's secondary. So the advantage of primary data is that it's first-hand, okay, real-time data. The advantage of secondary data is that it could have already been done by an expert, and there are disadvantages of both types of data also, which you need to know about. Think about expensiveness of gathering each of the bits of data, but in your case, you want to be looking at primary data in particular because it gives you a real, authentic overview of how Fountain Bridge has changed. Okay, you have gone out and done the field work, not someone else. Primary, first-hand data. So just to recap for your methodology, it's about the how, it's about the methods. You've got two separate paragraphs for two of your methods. For example, a traffic count, one paragraph, an environmental quality survey, one paragraph. Why was each of these methods effective? Primary or secondary data. Why was it effective? It was primary data. And for example, another point you might want to mention is, I'll look at this one again. Where is it? Why you chose three different areas very far apart from each other is to give you a good overview of the area. And also if you're doing the traffic count, really go into detail about the 5-minute periods, the tally marks, the different locations, and the environmental quality survey, the different variables.